Open Thighs Friday live has arrived on the Hard Starboard Radio Network, blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network. I am your host, Jasmius, your ruler, your benevolent despot, your fountain rabbi of conservatism, constitutionalism, Christianity, and that quantity which has never been in shorter supply in either political party or throughout the United States or the United Soviet Socialist States of Obamarekistan, that being common sense. Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Guest call-in number 646-478-5068. Email address jasmius@comcast.net. Chat room is open. All the podcasts are available here at blogtalkradio.com/HSR Network, at blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, at the Constitution Radio show page at kmet1490am.com, and of course at the aforementioned email address, jasmius, Jasmius, at comcast.net, for any of the 200 episodes of Constitution Radio during its 3.5-year plus run on KCAA AM 1050. Just send an email specifying the dates to jasmius at comcast.net. I'll be happy to get them to you, because I'm the only one that's got them. I'm the show archivist, as well as the show co-host and backup host and chief cook and bottle washer. And of course, all of it volunteer. I'd like to be getting paid for it, but that's not possible right now. At least so I'm told. Yes, it has crossed my mind that, all Doug has to do is just pull a Matt Ricks on me and just stop communicating with me, and I'll have no idea. I'm just sitting up here totally, 1,200 miles up the coast, totally disconnected from everything going on down there, other than what Mr. Gibbs chooses to tell me. And at this point, 2.5 years just about into this exile, I really feel like I don't have any allies or any friends. So, but, time will tell. Big promises, big if not non-specific promises were made a number of years ago, and, I've been waiting for that ship to come in ever since, and it still hasn't arrived, and, my ships don't arrive for me. The last time a ship arrived for me was 13 years ago, almost. May of 2003, that's the last time a ship arrived for me. So, ships don't come in anymore to my berth, to my dry dock. But while I'm still able to, I will continue to bring you this program. Now, you might ask, where have you been all week? Oh, it's real simple. I was providing another free service. Book editing. Yes. Another book by Mr. Douglas V. Gibbs, coming out very soon. It's called Concepts of the United States Constitution, which is not so much, it's not like the basic Constitution, which was just going through the Constitution sentence by sentence, really, just from beginning to end. Concepts of the United States Constitution is, as you might gather from the title, more of a thematic approach to constitutional exposition and analysis, and it does a good job approaching it from that direction. Although there are a couple of tangents, I would say, in which, yeah, that's right. In which Mr. Gibbs goes on a couple of topics, one being Abraham Lincoln, whom he calls one of the worst presidents in American history, on the sole criteria that he used extra-constitutional means, powers, presidential powers that Constitution does not bestow, does not enumerate, does not grant in Article 2 during the Civil War. Well, gee, that's really a shock in a time of war. You know how Doug frequently cites the Roman dissident. I guess you could call him a dissident, Cicero. Well, there's another expression that Cicero coined back in the transition or transitional years of the Roman Empire. Inter arma elim, inter arma elim silent leges, which is Latin for in time of war, the law falls silent. What a shock that in a time of civil war, the President of the United States, whoever it was, would temporarily assume the extra constitutional power. And the issue I had with it was that Doug was making it sound like this was some sort of plot, that they were scheming at Lincoln and the elites or would-be elites were scheming to do, I mean, yeah, there will always be a general push to try to exceed the bounds of the United States Constitution. That's just human nature. But the idea that it was a conspiracy, and that made Lincoln one of the worst presidents in American history. Let's just say I don't subscribe to that. In fact, a number of years ago, I went through and evaluated all the presidents, 1 through, well, at the time it was 1 through 43, and now 44, of course. And I ended up on a number of criteria. Okay, a number of criteria, not just one. That's not a fair evaluation. You got to evaluate according to, across the board, a comprehensive analysis, a comprehensive ranking. I evaluated all the presidents in American history on personal character, foreign policy, domestic policy, effectiveness, overall effectiveness, and whether or not they were reelected. By that measure, I ranked Abraham Lincoln as number 2 behind only George Washington as a great president. So you can do with that what you will. Even if you wanted to. Now, I weighted these: personal character at the top, the next most important factor, foreign policy, and then domestic policy, and then effectiveness, and then whether or not they were reelected. If you wanted to put domestic policy in which it would logically include whether they abided by the limitations on their powers of the United States Constitution itself, that would be, let's see, I would take 10 off of that, and let's see, no, actually, okay, well, if you wanted, let's say that you wanted to take off, I don't know, 15 divided by 3. I gave a top mark to Abraham Lincoln on domestic policy. If you wanted to give him the lowest possible mark on domestic policy, he would still be near great. I think he would drop to, let's see, 12 divided by 2. He would drop to a 4th place tie with James K. Polk. So, bottom line is Abraham Lincoln is not one of the worst presidents in American history. But, if you evaluate by one criteria, then you're going to get skewed results like that. The other tangent Mr. Gibbs went on in his book, Concepts of the United States Constitution, was the Federal Reserve. And Doug's Paul-esque, you could say, take on that institution. This is one of the things that irritates me about, I guess it's the difference, and I've said this before, it's the difference between being an activist and being a commentator. Doug is an activist, which takes away from his effectiveness as a commentator, because he can't be objective. You can have an opinion and a point of view and still be objective. It's not impossible. It's called having both your feet on the ground and living in reality. Not having any illusions about your own shibboleths, as it were. Doug finds it difficult to do at times. And when it comes to the Federal Reserve, he sounds kind of Paul-esque. Now, that having been said, I have no issues with auditing the Fed. Go ahead. I just think there are a lot of things that are higher on the list of priorities than auditing the Federal Reserve. But, if you want to audit the Federal Reserve, go ahead. I don't care. This is the thing that's frustrating working with Doug sometimes, is that it's not that I disagree with his policy recommendations. It's that the problem I have sometimes is with the invalidity of his premises. Because the Federal Reserve is not this conspiracy, and it's not omnipotent, and they don't control everything. The bankers and international bankers, and there are international bankers now. Back in the 19th century, late 18th century, back in the early years of the United States, of America, the American system, if you will, international bankers, they had more power. We were still, we hadn't emerged yet as a global power yet. But when we did in the 20th century, the international, it wasn't a question of international bankers. There were our bankers, which should be at least nominally an improvement in that premise that should serve to somewhat allay fears of a banker's conspiracy. So that's just, sometimes Doug, his premises sometimes are faulty, even though his policy prescriptions are just fine. I don't have any problem with auditing the Fed. Audit the Fed. Audit away. I don't care. Congress, now it says article in Article 1, I didn't have it in here. Oh, shoot. Never go on the air without having my pocket constitution within reach. It's somewhere else at Hardstarber Galactic Headquarters. But the bottom line is, the Constitution delegates to Congress the right to coin money. That's what it specifically says, coin money. And I know Doug's I don't know if he'll bring it up tomorrow, but he might. And if he does, my question to him is a very simple, straightforward question. How are you going to transition us from what we have today, for weal or for woe, and I'm not defending it necessarily, but how are you going to transition us from that to a coin-based society? Probably gold and silver, right? Or gold, anyway. Well, William Jennings Bryan was the silver whore, but because that would mean, I don't know, 80-90% of the money supply would disappear like that. That's just how I am. I'm a practical guy. I look at things in practical terms. How I would be, if I had the intelligence, or if I had Howard Wolowitz's level of intelligence, I'd probably be an engineer. But I'm not a. See, Doug tends to be a theoretician in a sense in the context of politics as a constitutionalist. I tend to be more of an engineer. I look at things in practical political terms. What's possible? I mean, it would be great if we could open up our own wormholes, and it would be great if we could invent a warp drive, and then we could go to the stars, and then I could emigrate from this crazy planet and settle somewhere else where it's wouldn't have to worry about jobs and money and so on and so forth. Just give me a replicator and a holodeck and a structure that protects me from radiation and orbital bombardment, and give me a phaser cannon and a deflector shield, and I'm all set to go, man. I'm all set to go. We'll just pack up my family and beam up to the ship and go to whatever planet I want to go to that's Class M, Earth-like, and I'm sure there are Earth-like planets out there. Whether they have life is dependent upon whether God put life on them. But in the meantime, I got to live here, and so I put up with this. I'll tell you. I don't know if I said this last week. I'll definitely say it now. I'm getting to the point where I don't even recognize this country anymore, and I don't even recognize my own party. And when it comes to, and when I'm editing Doug's book, and he starts going off on these this Paul Nut tangent about the Federal Reserve, and then Lincoln was the worst president ever, or not ever, but one of the worst presidents in American history. I start to wonder if I even recognize Doug anymore. And that doesn't even include the fact that he has, to this day, 6 months later, never specifically extended an invitation or otherwise told me that if and when the Center for the Study of the United States Constitution is funded, fully funded, that I got a billet there waiting for me. 6 months later, to this day, he's never told me that. And so I got to wonder, 2.5 years of keeping politicalpistachio.com going, keeping American Daily Review on the air out of my own pocket, co-hosting and guest hosting Constitution Radio, editing his books, contributing a couple of articles to Constitution News Quarterly, which never even saw the light of day, never even got printed, but, not my articles, the Constitution News Quarterly. I just got to wonder if any of that, it keeps me busy, but it doesn't pay me anything. Yeah, you do what you got to do, like the old saying goes, but was all these words, all these posts, thousands of posts by now at politicalpistachio.com. All these podcasts, all these radio program episodes, all the talk and all the pixels and all everything. Did it ever serve any practical purpose? Any purpose? Advancing the ball towards Doug's endeavors as a constitutionalist, a professional constitutionalist. You're getting to the level where the point where he is a professional constitutionalist. Did any of that ever matter at all? Do I truly have a part in any of that, or am I to be left on the shore if he ever does hit the big tide? Because I know I've mentioned this before, that the radio, the possibility of being on LA radio, Doug and John Hancock. Doug getting paid to do radio, and me still sitting here with nothing. know. I'm never in a good mood these days, folks, so don't expect me to. And there are some things we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to go long today. I'll just tell you right now, we're going to go long today, trust me. Into a podcast-only third hour. Now, there are going to be some things today that I have to say that some of you probably aren't going to like. But then you ought to be used to it by now, because I am, after all, the 21st century Jeremiah. Well, you could look at today's episode of the Hard Starboard Radio Network kind of like Captain America Civil War. One of the nicknames for the upcoming Captain America 3 Civil War, is Avengers 2.5. Because Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, was last year, and then there are going to be a lot of Avengers in Cap 3. Iron Man, War Machine, Black Panther, Ant-Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes. So it'll be a Captain America movie. It'll be Cap centric, but it will have kind of an Avengers feel to it, except they'll be going at each other, of course. And this edition of Hard Starboard Radio is kind of like that. It's kind of like the prelude to tomorrow's Saturday afternoon extravaganza. Starting at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. 3 hours, 2 of them at American Daily Review. The third hour being over on KMET1490am.com, KMET 1490 AM Smart Talk Radio for the Southern California Inland Empire area. For Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs, where we go over the All-Star Collision and Big Stories of the Week. Well, it's similar to that. Because, of course, I haven't been live all week. I haven't got a chance to talk about the New Hampshire primary. But before I talk about the New Hampshire primary, I have to talk about the prelude to it, last Saturday's debate that was, realistically, for all intents and purposes, the death blow to the Marco Rubio campaign. And the one who delivered the death blow, the one who delivered the power bomb that put Donald Trump over the New Hampshire top, New Jersey Governor Christie. Now, in case any of you were wondering, the term power bomb describes a professional wrestling move in which one antagonist bends the other over, puts his head between his legs, no, I'm not that way, reaches underneath his abdomen, lifts and flips him upside down so that he's facing the ceiling, and then drives him shoulder and neck first into the mat. And a lot of different versions of this, and a lot of different wrestlers had that as a finishing move. Big Van Vader, Kevin Nash, his was a jackknife version of the power bomb. And, Sid Vicious had it. The Undertaker had it. He called it The Last Ride, his version of the powerbomb. Now, you can see why I featured, why I mentioned all these super heavyweights, particularly Big Van Vader. He's the real-life Leon White. He was 450 pounds. You can see why I featured him as the metaphorical surrogate for the 450-pound governor. I don't know if Chris Christie weighs like that much, but he's kind of like what John Madden used to say about the Washington Redskins offensive line in the 1980s. Remember the Hogs? They were all over 300 pounds, and Madden used to say, it doesn't matter if they're 320, 340. They're just over 300 pounds. That's the same thing with the governor of New Jersey. The big man, as I also refer to him, who did a very effective job of breaking Marco Rubio's back in New Hampshire this past Saturday. Here's a quote from Newsmax. Surging Republican hopeful, or he was, Marco Rubio wilted under sustained attack in the latest U.S. presidential debate, denting his stature going into Tuesday's New Hampshire primary dominated by Donald Trump. And get to that here. Remember, we're reviewing the past week, so we're going to have to skim over. It's going to have to be from a certain height, maybe not 30,000 feet, but a certain height. The telegenic 44-year-old Florida senator, who polls suggest has the best chance of winning the White House for the Republicans, was savaged by his rivals late Saturday for his lack of experience floundering on a debate stage where he often shines. The most sustained attack was waged by New Jersey Governor Christie, a no-nonsense former federal prosecutor who has campaigned hard in New Hampshire and denigrated Rubio for being controlled by his team. Marco, the thing is this. When you're president of the United States, the memorized 30-second speech where you talk about how great America is at the end of it isn't, or it doesn't solve one problem, Christie said. Now, that's actually a non sequitur when you think about it. Does Rubio ever claim that extolling America's greatness will solve any problems in and of itself? No, he doesn't. His purpose is to point out, in, shall I say, Gibbs-esque, doggedly optimistic fashion, that we can solve our problems, that we're not doomed to permanent decline, which we are, but work with me here. Is this an argument for pessimism or America can't do spirit, Governor? Is a comeback Senator Rubio might have utilized. Indeed, Rubio and his staff had to have known that he was going to have a great big target on his back, sides, front, and stenciled across his pretty face. I mean, Christie telegraphed that several days before. But Christie's broadsides appeared to catch the Florida senator flat-footed, and he panicked. The senator was mocked for repeating the same rehearsed line over and over again, doing exactly what Christie criticized him for. Let's dispel with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing, Rubio said on a loop. Well, that line may be rehearsed, but it sure as heck wasn't wrong. There it is, the memorized 25-second speech, Christie interjected. There are a lot of lines and themes that a candidate revisits again and again over the course of a year's worth of speeches and debates and interviews. I mean, Governor Christie did the same thing, as does everybody. In fact, here's what something that Senator Rubio could have said in response to this. He should, turn to Governor Christie, adjust to maintain your escape velocity from its gravitational pull, and say something like this. There are a lot of lines and themes that a candidate revisits again and again over the course of a year's worth of speeches and debates and interviews, Governor. You do the same thing, as does everybody on this stage tonight. Is it really that unusual? Perhaps it's just that I've done my homework and know what I'm talking about. part of the preparation needed to be an effective president. The spontaneity in the White House is what you're looking for. We've already had 7 years too much of that. That might have got, I tell you, that. Now, admittedly, I'm not standing behind a podium being blinded by 5,000-watt Klieg lights right now, but, I came up with that right off the top of my head. Senator Rubio couldn't he have mustered that answer on the fly? Or been prepared for it? He doesn't think on his feet very well. And maybe he is similar to Barack Obama in the sense that when you take him off prompter, he gets a lot less articulate. Instead, Rubio got knocked off message into trying to counterattack Governor Christie. And the one he used didn't even strike at his biggest weakness. The usually poised Rubio was booed for accusing the governor of dragging his feet and leaving the campaign trail when his state was hit by a deadly East Coast snowstorm last month. They had to shame you into going back. You stayed there for 36 hours and then he left and came back, Rubio said. Wow. Rubio really didn't mention Hurricane Sandy 4 years ago? And Christie's fawning all over Barack Obama less than a week before the 2012 election that helped cost Mitt Romney the presidency, which some believe Christie did that deliberately because Romney did not end up selecting Christie to be his running mate. So it was like Christie's revenge. Rubio couldn't have brought that up? I mean, it was teed up for him right there for the taking, low-hanging fruit. And if Christie had come back with his usual defense of his love for his state and he was the governor and it was his job to do whatever it took to help his fellow Jersey-oids, well, that would have run clangingly counter to his I could care less about Winter Storm Jonas turning my state into a glacier, I've got a White House to win callousness. It would have shut down that avenue of attack in a heartbeat. But Marco Rubio's not a prosecutor, so he's not used to thinking on his feet. He's a senator, which means he's used to just talking and talking and talking and talking. Heck, Rubio didn't even bring up Bridgegate and ask the Jersey dirigible if that's the sort of executive legerdemain to which he was making reference. I just don't see how Rubio could have been that unprepared for a fusillade he had to know was coming. It really goes to illustrate Russell Wilson, Seahawk quarterback Russell Wilson's adage about the separation being in the preparation. And now Marco Rubio is being metaphorically wheeled out on a stretcher, or he was metaphorically wheeled out on a stretcher with under 3 days to go. Not good. Not good at all. But as I speculated this past Sunday, Ted Cruz could very well benefit, and of course he did. He wasn't the mass beatdown target Rubio was, but he turned in his usual quality performance, and if he had been such a target, I think we can take for granted that he wouldn't have been unprepared. Why? Because he's a Solicitor General. He was a Solicitor General. He was the Solicitor General of Texas. He's argued cases before the Supreme Court. I think Cruz versus Christie would have been a lot more even of a match, I think. Now, Trump didn't help himself by feuding with the voting audience, but the combination of his bigger lead in New Hampshire versus what the pro-caucus... wow, that should be post-caucus polls. Or pre-caucus polls, excuse me. Oh, what the heck. Let me just find it here and fix that typo. Well, I know it's around here somewhere. It's somewhere on the list. It should be pre-caucus polls. Pre-caucus polls. That's better. The pre-caucus polls showed, excuse me, a combination of Trump's bigger lead in New Hampshire versus what the pre-caucus poll showed in Iowa and the ass-kicking Rubio took last Saturday did indeed enable him to get into the win column on Tuesday. But as an aside, I did get quite a kick out of the introductions drama. And this is from hotair.com. As they introduced the candidates on the right side of the stage, Christie and Cruz came out and took their places, but there seemed to be some confusion on Ben Carson's entrance. Well, naturally, probably because he had run out to the nearby men's warehouse for a last-minute change of clothes after dribbling vinaigrette on his tie and didn't want Senator Cruz's staffers to see it. One camera was showing the backstage area where they were waiting, a.k.a. the gorilla position. Then they introduced Donald Trump, who walked to the edge of the curtain and stopped. He didn't come out on the stage. The moderator seemed confused, but went on to introduce Rubio and Bush, who also came to their stations. The camera kept going back to Trump, standing off stage, waiting. Now, I'll confess that for just a moment I found myself wondering if Trump wasn't planning some sort of epic kiss-my-ass moment where he turned around and left. That wasn't the case, though. I think this is Jazz Shaw whose quote this is. After Bush came out, followed by Dr. Carson, the moderator repeated his introduction of Trump with the phrase, "And lastly, we welcome back to the debate stage Donald Trump." Well, think about it, folks. Again, going back to the metaphor of professional wrestling. Of course, Trump wasn't going to turn around and walk out. Look what that did to him in Iowa. No, this was easily recognized by anybody who is the slightest bit familiar with professional wrestling, which Donald Trump most certainly is, since he was part of the main event of WrestleMania 23, you will recall. See, everybody knows that the champion is introduced last. I guess Senator Cruz doesn't watch much professional wrestling. And then came the punchline. This is hugely entertaining. Trump then walked out and took the center spot as the crowd applauded, but the backstage camera showed Ohio Governor John Kasich, who finished second for whatever it's worth, standing behind the curtains, completely forgotten, looking lost. Christie had to speak up and say something along the lines of, I think you forgot Kasich. You want me to introduce him? Oh man, that's perfect. That pity New Hampshire. Maybe that's what goosed him up into a distant second place. Maybe he got some pity votes. Now imagine if Christie had just kept quiet. I'm sure Senator Rubio would have appreciated that. And Kasich had to sheepishly slink out to his podium. Nothing could have been more appropriate and more deserved by such an aggravating, obnoxious rhino carbuncle of an unwanted and unneeded candidacy. Or Jeb Bush without the surname. Now, one other thought about Christie squashing Rubio last Saturday. Could anybody have ever seen the equivalent thing being done to Barack Obama at one of the Democrat debates 8 years ago after he broke out from the pack? Say, I don't know, then New Mexico governor, rats. Another typo I gotta fix. Let's go. Governor. Bill Richardson going full-bore kamikaze on the one, using the same avenue of attack and just tearing him from limb, leaving Obama standing there shell-shocked, going, humana, 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 Obama would have been a lot more comfortable more vulnerable to such an all-out assault than Rubio was. But that never happened, and we all know why. Barack Obama is half black, and thus the left's racist identity politics obsession protected him by rendering any such otherwise ordinary campaign rough and tumble preemptively impossible. And thus the perfumed prince swept on to the Democrat nomination and the dictatorship of the Obama-tariat that has brought America down to the permanent decline from which Rubio believes we can still rescue ourselves. But in our colorblind party, the Latino presidential candidate was fair game, as he should have been. And he did not and will not hide behind his ethnicity, as he should not. Not that Rubio or Ted Cruz are authentically Latino anyway, just ask the New York Times. Of course, given that Rubio is anywhere from 5 to 10 points more electable than Cruz or Trump in general election matchups, couldn't Christie have kept his mouth shut and taken one for the team? Or maybe Rubio's people have stuffed a triple whopper into Christie's mouth as soon as he opened it. We might still rue last Saturday night as a profoundly damaging campaign turning point, in the same way that you remember in the before the New Hampshire primary in 1980. Remember that at one of the debates, and there was some dispute or something that was going on the stage, and Ronald Reagan was trying to get his point across, and the debate moderator said, "Turn Governor Reagan's mic off," and he said, "Excuse me, I paid for this microphone." And the crowd went, "Ah!" And that was the end of the Bush 41 campaign. Reagan won New Hampshire, went on to the Republican nomination, and the third greatest presidency in American history. This may be another one of those turning points that we look back on, only this one we're going to lament. Okay. This is going to be time consuming. All right, no, well, maybe not. Or maybe it will. Okay. Well, I can't wait for it, so one computer does not respond, I go to the other one. But I gotta find where it was. Okay. And no, actually it's I don't know. I cannot find it. I cannot find that stack item I'm looking for. Okay, let me see. That would have been on that. No. It's further up. I keep forgetting. Whoa. All right. Here we go. Do I really have to wait for it to load? Do you have all the quotes handy? So, of course, as it turned out, New Hampshire did eliminate Rubio for all intents and purposes, and did give Ted Cruz a stronger than expected finish. Now, if you check your calendars, the Saturday debate was the beginning of the end for Marco Rubio. You know, he blew it. He choked. He screwed the pooch. And he's pretty much, you know, for all intents and purposes, he's finished. And thus, what could have been a photo finish with Donald Trump that might have driven a stake through the heart of his attempted hostile takeover of the GOP became Trump 35%, Kasich 16%, Cruz 12%, Bush 11%, Rubio 10%. Rubio finished 5th. He had a strategy. He called it the 3-2-1 strategy. Finished 3rd in Iowa, 2nd in New Hampshire, and win South Carolina. That was his strategy. Well, he did finish 3rd in Iowa. He didn't finish 2nd in New Hampshire. Oh, but you know, there is, I suppose you could say, some consolation. Christie finished 6th at 7%, but then that's why people were calling Christie's power bombing of Rubio last Saturday night a kamikaze run, because Christie didn't really have any shot of winning. And of course this confirmed it. In fact, he dropped out a couple of days ago. Governor Christie did, so he's done. And he did speak extensively with Donald Trump afterwards, late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. So you know, you can draw whatever conclusions you want to draw from that. I know what I'm drawing. The one conclusion I'm drawing. But then, Christie was pretty much already done. He pretty much always was. Rubio wasn't until Tuesday night. Thus, has the most viable general electable candidate in the Republican field, and yes, not a moderate, but a conservative with an admitted flaw here and there, been pointlessly, vengefully, spitefully, and politically suicidally driven from the GOP race for all intents and purposes. And for what? John Kasich isn't going anywhere. Neither is Jeb Bush. But now, given this temporary infusion of viability, both these rhino carbuncles will limp on, Bush especially, with over half of his shock and awe war chest still intact, keeping the field too big and the anti-Trump vote divided. Now, if the establishment lane really fears Trump, why did they send Christie to blow up the candidate with the best chance of stopping him? And doesn't the fact that they did so all the more clearly illustrate that Donald Trump has himself become the establishment candidate? Doesn't anybody in this field have the ability to think strategically and not think selfishly? To realize that there are more important things than just your own particular candidacy, especially if you really don't have any realistic chance of winning yourself? I mean, look at this headline at the Huffington Post. A racist, sexist demagogue just won the New Hampshire primary. Donald Trump seriously did it. Boy, howdy, that's just a delightful tweak of the Republican brand, isn't it? And if you think that low-information voters won't slurp that spin right down and carry it with them all the way into the voting booth on November 8th, then you're as ignorant as they are, frankly. But if you're looking for a little green shoot among the wreckage, a serpent among the ruins, poking its way determinedly through the ash and debris, Ted Cruz nabbed the bronze medal and did much better than expected in what was clearly a road game for him in the very much non-Iowa Granite State. The venues over the next month are much friendlier to him, meaning that for all intents and purposes, we're down to a two-man race. And Cruz has the superior ground game and organization, which will hold him in good stead on Super Tuesday, aka the SEC primary. If, however, you're looking for a reality check, the GOP establishment, whatever that is, crazily hates Cruz more than it does Trump. Though after the Texas senator has spent the past 3 years doing everything in his power to personally alienate and piss off and make enemies of them, it's admittedly not all that difficult to see why, even though it's still crazy. And will now do everything it can to blow him up as it did Rubio in New Hampshire. In the next contest, South Carolina, with its 50 delegates, is a winner-take-all state. Or, in other words, slow-motion Republicide. And just think, I get to be along to chronicle the ride. If only I was getting paid to endure it. Or, on the Democrat side, Bernie Sanders vaporized Hillary Clinton 60% to 38%, and they wound up with the exact same number of delegates. So, you might be seeing days of rage right again in Philadelphia this summer at the Democrat convention. We'll be back with hour number 2 right after this. Hour number 2 with Hard Starboard Radio Network. Open Thighs Friday. Did you know, just as an aside, on the Democrat side of the New Hampshire primary, not only did weekend Bernie Sanders destroy Hillary Clinton by 22 percentage points, he beat her by 11 points among women. That's right, even women, even Democrat women are deserting Hillary Clinton. And to the extent that her candidacy has a justification at all, any message, it's her vagina, right? First woman president. Well, women in New Hampshire, Democrat female voters supported Bernie Sanders by 11 percentage points over Hillary Clinton. And for those for whom honesty and integrity and authenticity are the most important factors, Sanders won that vote 91% to 5%. Just to give you an indication. Now, in the exact same way, well, not the exact same way, but in the equivalent way that Christie power-bombed Marco Rubio out of the New Hampshire primary to Donald Trump's benefit, so Ben Carson is threatening to do the equivalent thing, hamstringing Ted Cruz and putting Donald Trump over the top in South Carolina. Now, if this doesn't convince, now Ben Carson he was like 2% in New Hampshire. I mean, he was at 9%. He didn't even make it into double digits in Iowa. Evangelical heavy Iowa on the Republican side. He got like 2% of the vote in New Hampshire. Ben Carson's not going anyplace. His campaign is done. He has no reason to stay in this race. And he would conclude that if he was running his own campaign. I mean, if this doesn't convince you that Ben Carson is the manipulated puppet of greedy, ambitious handlers, then you're probably one of them. The quote is from the Washington Times. I still have millions of supporters. We have a lot of people who continue to make donations, and they're saying, please, 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 please don't drop out. Please stay in because you're strong. Well, I capitalized the wrong word. Sometimes you wonder how you can make certain mistakes. Please stay in because your strong states are going to be coming up, Dr. Carson said in an interview that aired on Wednesday's Hannity program on Fox News Channel. And I believe that to be the case. I believe you will see a significant improvement right here in South Carolina. And the more times we have an opportunity to get in front of audiences and actually explain what our policies are, it makes a huge difference. Of course, he's not really all that conversant in his own policies. He's demonstrated that repeatedly at these debates. They have their own personal reasons, but I was petitioned by the people. I'm a member of We the People, he said. And as long as I have the support of We the People, I will continue to go, particularly with them saying, please don't drop out. Oh my God. Run, Ben, run. Well, but Ben ran. And he was on top late last summer, like August, September, October, and then he faded, and he can't win now, and he can't win South Carolina, and he's just getting in Ted Cruz's way, and he should get the hell out. I mean, millions of supporters sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But think about it for a minute. 2 million would qualify as millions. And divided across all 50 states, that would be 40,000 per state. And that's both not enough to win a single caucus or primary, as well as being more votes than Gentle Ben earned in either Iowa or New Hampshire, which will continue to be demonstrated in each successive contest until he finally is allowed to get the message. No, Dr. Carson, you have millions of customers for your self-retailing business, which is all your campaign is, and perhaps all it ever was. You're apparently, and sadly, too weak-willed, or dare I say it, weak-minded, to realize it. Or your greedy, ambitious handlers are keeping you fooled and distracted from doing so. Either way, at precisely the time when you need to, here's this theme again, take one for the team and get out of Ted Cruz's way in order to aid in the overarching necessity of stopping Donald Trump's hostile takeover of the GOP on unwitting behalf of Clinton Nostra, in which South Carolina and its 50 winner-take-all delegates is now a pivotal contest. You're doubling down on tearing down the only candidate left in the race that has a hope in hell doing so. You know, if you're a conservative voter, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one viable choice left in this race. Senator Ted Cruz. Period. Exclamation point. Dr. Carson's butthurt excuses about Senator Cruz's supposed dirty tricks that had no bearing on the Iowa outcome are irrelevant minutiae that must be put aside in order to try and save our party from, this time it's literal, going the way of the Whigs and disenfranchising the right for, if not for good, then at least for the foreseeable future. I mean, isn't Ben Carson a bigger man than this? Character-wise, wouldn't you think? You know, I mean, he didn't choke like Marco Rubio did. He faded 3 months ago. He has no chance to win. All he can do is aid Donald Trump by staying in the race. Ben Carson must get out now. Today. This very instant. And then, yes, endorse Senator Cruz because that's the right thing to do. He cares about what he believes in. and wants what he believes in to still have a national platform and vehicle, the Republican Party, then Donald Trump must be stopped. But instead, just as Jeb Bush and Chris Christie tag-teamed to kill Marco Rubio in suicidal, self-defeating establishment internecine friendly fire warfare of whom Donald Trump was the sole beneficiary, so Ben Carson, at the behest of his millions and millions of the Ben's fans, is trying to kill Ted Cruz in suicidal, self-defeating Tea Party internecine friendly fire warfare, of whom Donald Trump will be the sole beneficiary. And you'll never guess who the Doc's tag team partner is. Get that? The Doc, the Rock, the Doc. Not bad. You'll never guess who his tag team partner in this atrocity is, folks. Would you believe Marco Rubio from hotair.com? Rubio is now repeating the same dirty trick charge against Ted Cruz that Dr. Carson and Donald Trump have been pushing lately. I thought Rubio's new strategy in South Carolina would either be to go hard after Trump in the name of elevating himself as the strongest not Trump in the race, and or to go hard after Jeb Bush in hopes of eliminating Bush as soon as possible. Instead, Rubio is pandering to Dr. Carson's voters by coming after Cruz, which not only reduces Cruz's chances of picking up the evangelicals he needs to win, but may damage Cruz among other undecideds by painting him as a cheater. The beneficiary, of course, is Trump. End of quote. And of course, because the beneficiary of everything is Trump. You know, it almost makes me wonder if this entire primary campaign is a work. That's another pro wrestling term. It means rigged, fake, staged. With every other genuinely Republican candidate part of a vast, orchestrated, choreographed secret operation to ensure that Donald Trump gets the Republican presidential nomination. You know, anybody who was at all familiar with listen, folks, anybody who was at all familiar with my writings and podcasts over the years, going back, 20 years or more, to my days on the old CompuServe Republican Forum in the last century, knows that I am no Fox Mulder. I've always believed that chalking perplexities up to conspiracism constitutes intellectual laziness. But watching this nomination contest unfold from one day and week and month to the next, and seeing the actual Republican candidates consistently way more prone to savaging each other than the New York liberal, the billionaire slumlord, hair boy, Donald Trump, all to his benefit, it even makes me wonder, folks. It's either that or my ongoing theme of mass psychosis. Either way, the end result can only be a pile of figurative, actual Republican corpses killed by their own myopic, petty selfishness, with Hillary Clinton's stalking horse standing triumphantly atop them. And in fact, Scott Lincecum, I don't know who that is, but Scott Lincecum tweeted it. He sent out a tweet that just said it all in 2 sentences. The fate of the Republic could very well depend on underachieving politicians humbly and graciously accepting defeat. Hence, in the words of, I can't remember the character's name, it's one of the Warriors 3 in Thor. Remember when Heimdall summoned them and he said, "We're doomed." Yes, we are. We are doomed indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I want to, I just want to, I report, you decide, but please think when you decide. This is what Donald Trump tweeted out yesterday morning. In essence, he said, Tea Partiers are RINOs too, you know. Here, in fact, here's the direct quote from the tweet. Remember, it was the Republican Party, with the help of conservatives, that made so many promises to their base but didn't keep them. Now, that base, of course, in other words, thee and me, is also made up mostly of conservatives. Well, at least it used to be. So what he's really saying here is that not only is the GOP establishment, whatever that's supposed to mean anymore, the enemy of Republican voters, but so is the House Freedom Caucus and its Senate equivalent and the entire Tea Party itself. He's lumping... do you understand what I'm saying? If there are any Tea Partiers out there who are still Donald Trump supporters, he's lumping you in with the hated, loathed establishment. We're all RINOs now, according to Donald Trump. He's the only real Republican. Hostile takeover, folks. Now, if you stop for a moment and take stock of that, both sides of the GOP civil war being the enemy of the Republican base, or the Trump-publican base, then by process of elimination, you have to ask the question of just exactly what Republican base Trump is speaking. You know how I've been saying of late that Trump, by his own words, has now become the establishment candidate at best, and is carrying out a hostile takeover of the GOP on Clinton Nostra's behalf that will excommunicate conservatives from American politics and fundamentally transform the Republican Party into something else? Well, now do you believe me? I mean, young Ben Shapiro has figured it out. He posted this at dailywire.com. So why is Trump blaming the help of conservatives for the lies of the Republican establishment? Because Trump isn't conservative, and now he is admitting it. And he never was. Dumbasses. Hey, yeah, that's. Let's go down the row, the row here. In fact, let's start that quote again with this audio clip. Why is Trump blaming the help of conservatives for the lies of the Republican establishment? Because Trump isn't conservative, and now he's admitting it, and he never was. Trump has spent most of his career giving money to Democrats. He's spent most of his career rejecting conservative policies. Even though all you that this is directed, that clip is directed at all you Tea Partiers who have ever supported Donald Trump, past or present. Just so I clarify that. Even now, Trump's version of conservatism, quote unquote, boils down to give me power and I'll make great deals, which is a leftist version of government rather than a conservative one. Like many members of the Republican establishment, Trump thinks the biggest problem with the Republican Party is conservative ideology. He only dislikes the establishment, quote unquote, because he doesn't run it. He wants to replace the old party establishment with himself. He wants to top the power pyramid. And so he blames conservatives. He blames the Tea Party. He blames thee and me, but much more thee, all ye thees out there who ever supported him. Now that's just the warm-up, folks. Here comes the Sid Finch fastball. This is also a strategic play to get ahead of the Cruz-led argument that Trump doesn't philosophically qualify to win conservative votes. Trump is stating preemptively that he isn't failing conservatism. You ready for this? You prepared? Seatbelt buckled, trays in the upright and locked position. Trump is stating preemptively that he hasn't failing conservatism. Conservatism has already failed. And he's just here to help the country. Many of his followers believe this. Shapiro routinely receives emails and tweets proclaiming that Trump fans don't care if Trump is conservative because he's a real American. Oh, so he's Hulk Hogan, huh? I am a real American. As though Americanism can be boiled down to, and are you listening, Mr. Gibbs? As though Americanism can be boiled down to nationalism while excising constitutionalism. Trump's going full-bore populist now, and populism is demagoguery and emotion and oligarchy on the fast track. All right, enough of the dumbassery. You've taken enough. You need smelling salts probably by this time, but it's just every last one of them was deserved. In other words, dictators and authoritarian strongmen are fine and dandy as long as they're one of us. You know, I've said for a couple of years now that what a lot of the GOP base really wanted was not another Ronald Reagan, but their own version of Barack Obama. I figured they meant freshman minority senators like Rubio or Cruz. Turns out they meant the dictator part literally. You know, my aforementioned friend, Douglas V. Gibbs, America's Constitution Authority, has said often of late that he likes much of what Donald Trump says and believes it's possible that he is sincere about it. Doug, I really wonder if those sentiments, I really hope those sentiments will change after this Trump tweet. You can count on me bringing it up tomorrow on Saturday Afternoon Radio Extravaganza, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review. Now, Shapiro also hits on something that I've been raging about for the past 8 months. The unthinking anger that has gripped so much of the GOP base and how the billionaire slumlord has been able to so effortlessly exploit it. One of the great puzzles of the primary season is why a candidate who so recently espoused moderate or left-wing views is succeeding in a party that favors purity over pragmatism. Sound like anybody, you know, my Tea Party friend? Of course, Trump can always claim that he had a road to Damascus-style conversion to conservatism, but this claim surely won't cut it for many movement conservatives. Will it? I mean, after all, if Trump could flip to the right so recently, perhaps he'll flop back to the left in due course. Like he's been doing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth ever since he got into the race. And especially like seconds after he were to take the oath of office next January. You know, for Trump, the solution has been to announce something so outrageously offensive to liberals, so contrary to every Marxist shibboleth, that its utterance immediately disqualifies him from being a leftist, or categorized that way in a superficial sense, because that's what he thinks conservative. See, that's how he got a lot of Tea Partiers' attention initially. But anyway, he said things. You know, it's not unlike if Rush Limbaugh had run for president, in the sense that what made Rush Limbaugh so popular? He said things that a lot of conservatives out there were already thinking. And that's what Trump did. Trump didn't, like I said all along, Trump doesn't mean a single thing he says. He's telling you what you want to hear, and in a way that you want to hear it, but he doesn't mean it. You know, it's like pulling my hair out, trying. Why can't you understand this? Republican voters? What is so difficult to understand about this? He's a liar. He's Bill Clinton with a toupee. Why can't you understand this? Opposing Obamacare isn't good enough. After all, some communists aren't big fans of the Unaffordable Care Act, like Bernie Sanders, for example. Neither is it, although he did vote for it, neither is it sufficient to back gun rights. Many on the left own guns and believe in the Second Amendment. Well, I beg to differ with that, but regardless. In any case, these are issues on which reasonable people can disagree. What Trump needs is something that is literally unspeakable for a liberal. Trump's immigration policy is just the ticket. Virtually no communist would dream of banning the world's 1.6 billion Muslims from visiting the United States. The very idea represents a kind of exclusionary nativism that is anathema to liberals. Trump's anti-immigrant language is an inefficient way of proving, it doesn't prove anything really, that he has abandoned the left. In a single glorious moment of illiberal demagoguery with no substance supporting it, he can achieve what would otherwise take months of debate and rebuttal. And of course, he's not responsible for anything, so, you know, he's footloose and fancy free, right? Even though it contradicts numerous past statements and is almost always subsequently walked back. As he did with the mass deportation vow. Remember, not too long after that, he said he'd let all the good illegals right back in. And the Muslim ban, he said, after a few days later, he said, well, it'll only be temporary. Trump has, in essence, a get-out-of-jail-free card to say anything he needs to say at any given moment, no matter how often he flagrantly contradicts himself, and never suffer any political damage from any of it, and indeed have it boost him in the polls. Who does that remind you of? You say, if your answer is Bill Clinton, go to the head of the class. Even Bill Clinton himself could never have dreamed of the just total carte blanche that Donald Trump's been bestowed. You know, I remember way back in the 1992 campaign when Rush Limbaugh coined the term character matters to point out the danger to the country of entrusting with presidential power a man so utterly bereft of it. Bill Clinton was a corrupt, sexually deviant liar who could only be trusted to do whatever would personally and politically benefit himself. Law and Constitution be damned. The only reason why he didn't succeed in fundamentally transforming America the way Barack Obama has a generation later is that America's collective moral compass had not yet been eroded away to the enormous degree necessary to accelerate the degeneration of the political culture to that degree of prostration and vulnerability. But the Clinton detour did a lot of that eroding, sending the Democrat Party over the edge into radical insanity that was revealed in the post-election Florida insurrection in 2000. That insanity culminated in the rise of the Obama dictatorship 8 years later. But at least, I'm going to struggle. But at least the GOP remained as a bastion and stronghold of conservatism and rationality. Now, the past 8 years of Obamism have driven the Republican base over the same crazy cliff off of which the Dems took their plunge a decade and a half ago. And now, for the first time, as I mentioned, alluded to in the first hour, I am finding myself unable to recognize the party in which I have resided since the Gipper made it the home of conservatism when I was in high school, ladies and gentlemen, 36 years ago, and in which I am increasingly like an ideological Valentine Michael Smith, a stranger in a strange land. Perhaps 2 Timothy verses, chapter 4, verses 3 to 4, that sums it up best. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers or candidate in accordance with their own desires, and will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. Welcome to real America, my friends. Meanwhile, I will be on my way to Mars if Valentine Michael Smith will lend me his ship. Oh, yes. Let's take a look at this one. Let's see. Yeah. The implosion story. Yeah, this is a good one. But it does have a downside to it. I'll save that for the end of this item. The implosion of La Clinton Nostra has begun. With the New Hampshire primary. Hey, I used that term when Gentle Ben Carson, hit the campaign staff upheaval iceberg, so at least I'm being etymologically consistent. Now tell me this doesn't sound eerily familiar with 8 years ago. This is from the Politico.com. Hillary and Bill Clinton are so dissatisfied with their campaign's messaging and digital operations that they are considering staffing and strategy changes after what's expected to be and was a blowout loss in Tuesday's primary in New Hampshire, according to a half dozen people with direct knowledge of the situation. The Clintons, stung by her narrow, really in reality it was a narrow defeat in Iowa, had been planning to reassess staffing at the campaign's Brooklyn headquarters. Remember we talked about that before, about they're just Hillary blaming all her problems on her staff. They're failing her. Kind of like Skeletor used to blame all his failures on Beastman and Merman. And Evil, well, not so much Evil Lynn. She was more of a rival, but on He-Man and Masters of the Universe. But the Clintons have become increasingly caustic in their criticism of aides and demanded the reassessment sooner, a source told Politico. Because nothing's ever Hillary Clinton's fault, of course. So it's her aides and campaign staff's fault for not being capable of doing the impossible and actually getting her over with Democrat voters in New Hampshire or anywhere else. The talk of shakeup echoes what happened in 2008, when Mrs. Clinton was on the verge of sacking her campaign manager and several top communications officials before her surprise win in New Hampshire bailed her out, because remember, she lost the Iowa caucuses to another far-left backbenching senator. Before her surprise win in New Hampshire bailed out her beleaguered staff. Over time, however, she slowly layered over top officials, essentially hiring old hands like Hillary Land stalwart Maggie Williams and pollster Jeff Guerin to run the campaign, while the previous staff was quietly relegated to subsidiary positions. And she still lost. Something that she should keep in mind, but of course will not. Why? Well, I've said it thousands of times by now, both here and on the air. Well, and on politicalpistachio.com, but I'll say it again. Hillary Clinton is the worst candidate in American political history. She is unlikable, unrelatable, arrogant, abrasive, imperious, royally hypocritical, and an abysmal, though promiscuous, liar. She's a worse liar than Barack Obama is. She's the anti-Bill. Sick Willie could get elected Pope. Hillary Clinton couldn't get elected dog catcher. Now, 8 years ago, she could rationalize that her defeat was a case of bad timing. That she ran in the same cycle as an idiot savant who had his skin color working for him as well, the first black president and all that. Half-black. President. That it just wasn't meant to be. But that next time, in 2016, lightning couldn't possibly strike twice, could it? And she would have her coronation. But now she's losing to a septuagenarian, avowedly socialist white guy whose candidacy looked like a joke until he steadily overtook her in the polls as far back as last summer. It appears that the only way for Hillary Clinton to win the Democrat nomination is for her to not be just lightly opposed, but to be unopposed altogether. Which I'm sure that's exactly what she was expecting. Which is proven to be as difficult as holding open a wormhole. She's got plenty of negative energy. I don't think she has that much. See, the reason for that is simple. Hillary Clinton is the worst candidate in American political history. Problem is in her cracked mirror, just like the witch in Snow White. But we can always count on the conventional wisdom to adhere to the wish-castingly wrong answer every single time. Currently, that teaches that weekend Bernie Sanders was only able to compete with the Empress in Iowa and New Hampshire because he was able to spend all his time in just those two small states. When the campaign moves on to more and bigger states simultaneously, Clinton Nostra's greater resources and organization will prevail. And once again, the conventional wisdom is not giving Hillary's awfulness nearly enough credit. This is from the Washington Post. After New Hampshire, though, the states get significantly more diverse. Basically, every one of the next couple dozen states to vote is less white than Iowa and New Hampshire. Of course, Hillary Clinton is white, too. But just thought I'd mention that. Now, we've called this Mrs. Clinton's non-white firewall, or Washington Post has, anyway. Basically, more diverse electorates start voting, and Mrs. Clinton had a better chance of or has a better chance of putting together a series of wins and ending Bernie Sanders once and for all. But while Mrs. Clinton might indeed be a shoo-in in South Carolina, or might not, that isn't so clearly the case in Nevada. Technically, Nevada is actually the more diverse state of the two. Non-Hispanic whites comprise just 51.5% in Nevada, compared to 64% in South Carolina. Nevada has many Hispanics, though, while South Carolina has a largely black population. But to assume that both play to Mrs. Clinton's strength in similar ways is to miss the point. Which is, and you knew this was coming, she doesn't have any strengths. Not as a candidate, not as a person. Come on. Okay, where was I? Oh, yeah. Not as a candidate, not as a person. And did we mention that she's as white as Bernie Sanders? As his hair? And that, as I've also said many times, the Democrats will never win another presidential election in which they don't nominate a minority candidate. Right? So, mark my words on that, folks. Her resources aren't enough. Her organization isn't enough. Her vagina isn't enough. Her aides aren't to blame. Hillary Clinton will never be president of the United States and will never be even the Democrat presidential nominee, ever, for one single solitary, fat, saggy, jowly, manifestly, ubiquitously unpleasant reason. 3 words. Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's as simple as that. Donald Trump and Michael Bloomberg notwithstanding, of course. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders' platform, shall we? Oh man, this is hugely entertaining. Let's just look ahead at who. Because in fact, there was a story just today. I saw it at hotair.com that the RNC, Republican Party, is starting to gather oppo research on Bernie Sanders in the event that he actually wins the Democrat nomination in Mrs. Clinton's place. Oh, and by the way, that downside to the Hillary Clinton story I just mentioned, the implosion of Clinton Nostra. One word: superdelegates. Picture this, Lim. Philadelphia, this summer. Bernie Sanders has won vastly more delegates in primary and caucus elections than Hillary Clinton. But all these superdelegates, which are Democrat Party officials and Democrat elected office holders, vote for Hillary Clinton and push her over the top. Picture that for a minute. Picture Bernie Sanders defeats Hillary Clinton for the Democrat nomination fair and square, but the Democrat nomination, through the use of superdelegates, steals the nomination from Weekend Bernie and gives it to Hillary Clinton anyway. The candidate that the base of the Democrat Party doesn't like, can't stand, doesn't trust. Could be very, very interesting. Little laugh-in reference for you there, Artie Johnson, his German character. But let's take a look at Bernie Sanders. His platform, in essence, calls for the elimination of the Pentagon and the CIA. Or at least that's what his political mentor believed. I prefer to think of it this way. The delegate apple don't fall far from the candidate tree. It's delving. This is some of the. In fact, this is an example of some of this Oppo research. As a matter of fact. Now, this is from Newsmax. Democrat Senator Bernie Sanders, who enjoys a double-digit lead over former Commissar of State Hillary Clinton and beat her by 22 points, blew her doors off in the New Hampshire primary, has sought to reinvent himself as a democratic socialist, but his past, if you can imagine, that's the reinvention. But his past, including his serving as elector or delegate on behalf of the Radical Socialist Workers' Party in 1980, may prove troublesome. No, notice that? May prove troublesome. Not will. May. See, this is where one of our major political parties is now, folks. Fully, fundamentally transformed. Part of the Obama legacy. On Monday, The Atlantic reported that Sanders began his political career on the revolutionary left. Adding, in 1980, he served as an elector for the Socialist Workers' Party. In October, the Washington Post reported that Sanders had served as an elector for the 1980 Socialist Workers' Party nominee, Andrew Pulley. The SWP traces its roots to the Communist League of America. By the way, Alex Ferguson would love this story. I ought to email it to him. I ought to email the link to him. He would love this story because this is just right in his wheelhouse. The SWP traces its roots to the Communist League of America, a pro-Marxist group that supported Leon Trotsky in his 1927 split with Joseph Stalin. Among the positions Sanders' candidate, Pulley, advocated on behalf of the SWP in 1980 were... Pulley called for solidarity with the revolutionary governments of Iran and Cuba. According to the New York Times, his remarks appeared to suggest America should join forces with revolutionary regimes that he imagined to be beneficent actors on the global stage. Well, Barack Obama's already done that. Checked off those boxes. At the time, Iran was holding U.S. hostages in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. In April of 1980, in an April 1980 Associated Press report, Pulley called the possibility of U.S. military action in reaction to the Iranian hostage crisis an ominous danger to world peace. He urged then-President Jimmy Carter to hand America's deposed ally, Shah Reza Pahlavi, over to the revolutionary mullahs, for execution, of course. Kind of like Barack Obama has handed the revolutionary mullahs nuclear weapons. The SWP sought to eliminate all U.S. defense and CIA spending. That will be the fiscal responsibility portion of Bernie Sanders' platform, I'm guessing. The $150 billion, well, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Saved would be spent on, ta-da! Public Works Infrastructure Project. Of course, this would amount to unilateral U.S. disarmament in the midst of the Cold War and Western Europe's subjugation to Soviet hegemony. Or in other words, the good guys winning in Mr. Pulley's and Senator Sanders' light. Now, Obama, of course, chose to homosexualize and Islamicize the U.S. military instead of abolishing it. But otherwise, these boxes have been checked off as well, which leaves military abolition to President Sanders, I guess. The Times reported that Pulley favored nationalizing virtually all private industry, especially oil, automobiles, and the railroads. Well, Obama's already done at least most of that as well. In other words, Sanders' preferred candidate sought to end private enterprise as we know it. a system that New York Times columnist David Brooks is credited with the greatest reduction in poverty in human history, citing the recent rapid advance of economic conditions in India, Red China, and other developing nations. Pulley voiced strong support for the Nicaraguan revolution of Daniel Ortega. Pulley told the Associated Press in August 1979 that America should send food and medicine rather than Marines to Nicaragua. Pulley added that Anastasio Somoza's overthrow had inspired the exploited masses the world over. According to a September 1980 Times report, New York Times, the SWP platform also proposed cutting the work week to 30 hours, but it would force companies to pay workers as if they were still working 40. In other words, give money away. Free stuff! Sounds like a creative minimum wage increase in the Obama economy. Cutting workers' hours without cutting their pay, it maintained, would reduce unemployment because companies would be forced to hire additional workers and then overpay them and give away free money to them too. That is how it would have worked. Without being able to control labor costs, yeah, sure, bankruptcy is always a job-creating economic stimulus, is it not? Sorry, stimulus? The likelihood the policy would touch off massive inflation while also incentivizing companies to automate production and eliminate workers altogether went unmentioned. Gosh, it reads like today's headlines, doesn't it? Seriously, no joke. I'm not kidding about that. Now let me ask you all a very basic, straightforward question. Is there any reason at all, to believe that the above isn't also Bernie Sanders' 2016 platform down to the last jot and tittle? Because while the man has definitely aged, he has not changed at all. The Newsmax article continues. But they make plain that Sanders was, in fact, a self-styled 1960s-era revolutionary. When he came to Vermont in the late 1960s to help plan the upending of the old social order, wrote the Times' Sarah Lyle in July, the future presidential candidate Bernie Sanders brought with him the belief that the United States was starkly divided into two groups, the establishment and the revolutionaries. He was a revolutionary. Sanders' self-conception as someone who would overturn the established order was apparently quite sincere. In an article for the Vermont Freeman, an alternative newspaper, Sanders described the United States as a dying society whose economy was based on useless goods that were designed to break down and are used for the slaughter of people. In other words, I'm guessing he meant guns by that. Ready to start a political revolution? His campaign website provocatively asks. And here's the punchline you've all been waiting for. The irony of Sanders' status as a potential Democrat standard bearer claiming the mantle of democratic socialism is that many Democrats reject him as too mainstream. Bernie Sanders isn't socialist enough for many Democrats, Bloomberg's David Freelander has observed. End of quote. And OMG. This of the same man that plans to impose a $2.5 trillion per year single-payer healthcare gulag in Obamacare's place. And remember, folks, current polls show Bernie Sanders would defeat Donald Trump this November by a wide margin. Still think this country is conservative, my Tea Party friends? Even if General Secretary Sanders wouldn't have all that much fundamental transforming left to do. We'll be back with hour number 3 right after this. No, that. Sorry, hold on, folks. I'm trying to get the Jasmia's cam on again for hour number. Oh, so now, okay, now it's back on. Well, you didn't tell me that. I couldn't see it actually. So bear with me here while I get back to where I'm supposed to be. Like at the top of the hour break wasn't long enough. Okay. Where the hell is it? Gosh darn it. Where is it? What's the keyword here? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one. Why can't this ever go where I want it to go? Oh, here it is. Finally. Good grief. Let's see, that was on... Well, it should be right around here. It should be... But it's not. Oh, here it is. The empire, so to speak, the regime, if you will, has retroactively struck back against Clive Bundy. Well, I tell you what, this computer's acting like it's on its last leg. And it better not be, because I need this computer. Yes, Clive Bundy. Now, the Oregon occupation, or whatever you want to call it, I call it the Second Battle of Bundy Hill. That's been going on or went on for pretty much the month of January. But it didn't involve Clive Bundy directly. It involved his sons, Ammon Bundy, Ryan Bundy, and their friends and rancher allies and so forth. And it turned out pretty much the way that it was always going to. I went back and looked at my first post about This politicalpistachio.com was on January the 3rd. And I said then that this was not going to end well, that it was a stupid thing to do, a stunt that was going to be as bad an idea as the first Battle of Bundy Hill, when the Bundys were defending their home against federal intruders, was a outstanding story and a boon to the cause of constitutionalism and land and property rights. And it proved out. It unfolded pretty much exactly as I predicted. It turned out to not be a good idea. And the feds did have something to say about whether the Bundy gang, as I short-handedly refer to them, did have a problem with them occupying federal land or a federal facility, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And they eventually did do something about it. And it cost, of course, Robert Finicum his life. But it also now has nabbed, and that's why I say retroactively, Clive Bundy himself. Now, this latest chapter in this sorry saga was unfolding last night when the final four members of the Bundy gang, as I refer to them, actually this is Wednesday night, holed up in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Remember, there were four members of the Bundy gang, quote-unquote, that still refused to leave. Even after Amon Bundy told them, hey, look, we gave it our best shot, we lost, go home to your families. They wouldn't leave. And as I said at the time, hey, Amon Bundy sold them on this, that this was going to be some great heroic adventure, standing up to the feds, speaking the truth to power, sticking it to the man. I mean, they sold them on all of this. And then look how it turned out. Did not turn out the way that he told them it would. You know, I think that, I said it last week, it had to be last week, it's the first time I've been on live this week, that if anything happens to them, it's on Amon Bundy's head. I mean, I think that's really what got to Amon Bundy and made him realize this was not a good idea. Is that, I mean, it's one thing to put your own life on the line, but you talk other people into joining you and then they get killed. Yes, somebody else would have killed them, but they wouldn't have been in a position to get killed if you hadn't talked them into it. I think that's what's going to be in Amon Bundy's conscience, ladies and gentlemen. But, as I say, the latest chapter in the sorry saga was unfolding last night Wednesday night, when the final four members of the Bundy gang holed up in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge Hair Care Tire Center and Gift Shop, or whatever it was, having vowed for days now that they would never leave or surrender, were preparing to surrender. The quote comes from NBCnews.com. The remaining four occupiers at an Oregon federal wildlife refuge said they planned to turn themselves in Thursday morning after being surrounded by FBI agents overnight. The FBI's move to encircle the last holdouts marked a dramatic escalation in a mostly slow-moving 6-week standoff led by Amon and Ryan Bundy, both currently in jail at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. A man identified as Sean Anderson, one of the remaining four holdouts, diehards, said the occupiers would turn themselves in once Nevada Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore and North Carolina-based Christian evangelist Franklin Graham arrived at the refuge and are arrested by federal agents. Just kidding. Assemblywoman Fiore and Reverend Graham haven't been arrested yet. The four holdouts aren't worthy, frankly, of Fiore's and Graham's assistance, given how pathetic is their unwillingness to own their actions, much less defend them, or be honest about what it is they're doing. Here's what Mr. Anderson said, quote, "We're not surrendering, we're turning ourselves in," the 48-year-old said on the sometimes fiery phone call. "It's going against everything we believe in," end of quote. Dude, you're going against everything you claim to believe in. You're surrendering. There is no difference, physical, substantive, or semantic, between that and turning yourselves in, unless you're planning to use Fiore and Reverend Graham as human shields. It's precisely and exactly the same thing, which I'm assuming that Sean Anderson knows, or that phone call wouldn't have been so fiery. It tells me that there is a strong possibility that these four gentlemen really won't be taken alive, if for no other reason than to up the martyrdom ante. You know, in a phrase, the Bundy gang bit off more than they could chew. And they were fools to think they could chew that much in the first place. Unlike 2 years ago at Casa Bundy, this time they attacked the feds, in effect, by their occupation stunt, forfeiting every last inch of the moral high ground they had previously giving the government the public relations cover to swoop in and effortlessly squash them, costing one of their number and perhaps counting, Robert Lavoy Finicum, his life. And in a tying off of that 2014 loose thread, costing the Bundy patriarch his freedom too. In rather preemptive fashion, actually. This is from OregonLive.com. Nevada rancher Clive Bundy, the father of Amon Bundy, the leader of the occupation at an Oregon wildlife refuge, has been arrested after flying into Portland International Airport. He was detained by the FBI and booked into Multnomah County Jail Wednesday night, the prison's records show. The four remaining occupiers of the wildlife refuge said they would turn themselves in Thursday morning. We'll see. I don't know if they did or not, but Chris, I haven't seen anything about a climactic shootout, so I guess they did. A post on Bundy Ranch's Facebook page said, Clive and Bundy just landed in Portland. We are being told by eyes on the ground that he was surrounded by SWAT teams and detained. I tend to think that they didn't need an entire SWAT team to take one old man into custody. Even if he was armed, and hey, who knows? We are talking to TSA here, so you can't rule it out. I'm not sure which is less believable, the federale overkill or anything a Bundy says at this point, to be honest with you. Bundy faces a conspiracy charge, and note what the specific charge, or the specific actions for which he's being criminally charged. He faces a conspiracy charge to interfere with a federal officer, which is an interesting definition of a criminal charge, is it not? The same charge lodged against two of his sons, Amon and Ryan, for their role in the January 2nd takeover of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge near Burns, Oregon. He also faces weapons charges. Bundy has been under federal scrutiny since... Now, this can't have anything to do with this Oregon episode. It can't. Clive Bundy has not been there. This has to be for 2 years ago. Doesn't it? Doesn't this have to be for 2 years ago? The first Battle of Bundy Hill? What else could they be charging him for? He wasn't in Oregon until his plane landed in Portland on Wednesday night. Bundy has been under federal scrutiny since his ranch standoff with the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. He has not paid grazing fees on federal land, and the Bureau of Land Management claims he owes the agency $1 million in unpaid fees and penalties, which in reality, constitutionally speaking, he does not. He and militia supporters confronted federal agents who had stolen Bundy's cattle that were found on what the Bureau of Land Management claimed was federal property. It was his ranch. It was his home, which he was defeated. Confronted. He was defending his home and his family and his property. He does get to do that. That is the core of what the Second Amendment was promulgated to do. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. See, that was the right thing to do. That was easy to understand. Everybody could get that. A man defending his home against tyrannical federal agents, federal government. It was easy to understand that. The Oregon occupation? Not even close. Another key participant on the Nevada showdown was Ryan Payne, a Montana militiaman who helped organize militia snipers to take aim at federal agents in Nevada, and who was intruding upon whom there. Payne is considered the tactician behind the Oregon takeover and also has been arrested and faces a federal conspiracy charge, close quote. My Tea Party friends, there is a lesson to be learned from the order and sequence of these events. In the first Battle of Bundy Hill, as I say, the feds attacked Bundy, stealing and seizing his assets, invading his property, attacking his home. They're threatening to. Clive Bundy, his friends, and militia allies prepared to defend themselves if the feds took the confrontation all the way. But they did not do so. The feds, that is. Why? Bad optics. Public relations. It would have been too obviously tyrannical, thuggish, and reminiscent of the Obama regime's police state mentality. It would have made the Bundys the oppressed victims in the public's perception, and that is the battlefield. Public perception. Since that would have been an impediment to the Obama green extremist agenda and a PR headache they didn't need, the BLM backed off. And the second Battle of Bundy Hill, the Oregon occupation, the Bundys were the aggressors, foolishly thinking they could ever get leverage over the federal government to force them to capitulate to their outlandishly ambitious demands. Privatization of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Should it be privatized? Damn straight it should. But they were never going to force the feds to do this through what amounts to an act of extortion. Release of Dwight and Stephen Hammond, despite the Hammonds disavowing the Bundys' actions on their behalf. He said, remember? The Hammonds came right out and said, hey, they don't speak for us. We don't want anything to do with what they're doing. Don't look at us. They're already looking at 4 more years in the slammer. And even then, the regime tried to wait them out, the Bundy gang, that is. Remember Amon Bundy vowing that he and his friends were prepared to stay there for years? That they weren't going to do so forever, upon which the Bundys were perversely and apparently counting in their evident belief that some sort of statement could be made from another Ruby Ridge-esque outcome. See, Ruby Ridge, that was the government invading and attacking a private citizen on his or on their property. Same thing with the Branch Davidian thing. Remember in Waco, Texas? Remember that back in 1993? Same thing. Government agents invading somebody else, invading private property. And the first Battle of Bundy Hill, same thing. This Oregon occupation was not that. It was a PR disaster for constitutionalism and land and property rights. Because the Bundys were the aggressors. Something they nominally got with Finnegan, making a statement that is, something they nominally got with Finnegan's death, but which only seemed to put the proverbial fear of God into them instead, and brings into question, the Bundys that is, whether they ever, at any point, thought through their plan at all, to the slightest degree. That's why I've always considered the whole episode to be a fiasco from the beginning. And what have the Bundys gained from their patriotic efforts? They're all in jail. One of their friends is in the morgue, and they're now perceived as domestic terrorists and criminals. The moral high ground on the issue of land rights that they boldly and courageously seized 2 years ago, now forfeited in a fit of romanticist delusionalism. Understand this well, folks. Understand this well, my Tea Party friends. If tyranny is to be resisted, the people must be on our side. And most Americans don't have the slightest idea that we languish under the very sort of tyranny that the Founding Fathers feared. That the people are to be educated and persuaded of that reality and the righteousness of the cause of patriotic resistance. We cannot act in any way or matter that makes it easier for the government to cast us as, well, domestic terrorists and or criminals. When the Bundys were defending their home against one of the many branches of Obama's stormtroopers, they were clearly the heroic good guys. The latter clearly the evil bad guys. Why else do you think the Bureau of Land Management backed off? But when the Bundys seized federal property, regardless of whether or not the Fed should own it, that's beside the point. They shouldn't, but they do. Possessions, 9/10 the law and all that. That moral clarity was blown out the proverbial airlock, and the feds had the propaganda cover they needed to move in. And now the entire Bundy clan is behind bars. The men, anyway. Publicly perceived as wacko lunatics instead of the de facto political prisoners they really are. And the cause of land and property rights has been further discredited. In any war, whether literal or figurative, there is always a battle for the hearts and minds of the people. The ideological war, in other words, as the old Soviet communists used to call it. Ignore that aspect of war. Fool yourself into believing that right makes might, and without convincing a majority of your audience. And the more likely your defeat will be. The struggle is about far more than just fight, fight, fight! If the fate of the Bundy gang doesn't convince y'all of that, nothing will. Now, that brings us to... No, I'm not even going to try to deal with that. Because there's not time. That brings us to the... an account, an ostensibly eyewitness account, of the shooting of the aforementioned Robert Lavoie Finnegan. And let me just find it here in the stack. Here it is. Now, I went through, I said on the air last Saturday on KMET, I said there are a lot of questions that remain to be answered about that shooting incident. A lot of questions. And the government as is their wont, is mum. They're not saying anything. Okay? So you can draw whatever. Do I have that? Did I upload that this week? I don't think I did. No, in fact, I'm sure I didn't. Because, of course, I haven't been live on the air this week, other than today. So, what I'm making reference to is the government denies all knowledge, government cover up, well, whatever. They didn't have a black helicopter overhead, but they did have a black drone. That's really kind of the 21st century equivalent of a black helicopter, isn't it? But a lot of questions remaining to be answered. And now we have this eyewitness account by a woman named Shauna Cox, who says she was in the truck that Robert Finicum was driving when he was ultimately gunned down. So I just want to go through her story here and tell you what I think. And as we're about to see, ladies and gentlemen, context is a wonderful thing. In an exclusive interview with Dennis Michael Lynch Unfiltered, Shauna Cox says that on January 26th, she and fellow protesters, Robert Finicum, Ryan Payne, and Victoria Sharp, were in a truck headed to meet with the Grant County, Oregon Sheriff's Office to discuss their armed siege of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. Well, it's not a siege, it's an occupation. They weren't trying to take over, they already had taken it over. But as they... Well, now, hold on, let's ask a question here. Grant County is the next county over from the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Why weren't they discussing a standoff with the county sheriff? The county that the refuge is in. Wouldn't that have been closer? But as they braked at a traffic light, and Oregon State police troopers who had been trailing them closed in, all hell broke loose. Here's a question I have. When did the Oregon State Patrol start tailing them? I mean, I would have to think it was from the moment they left their, well, what would you call it, a base camp, a command post? And that they would have assumed that every time they went anyplace, they were being followed, especially at the end of the standoff. I mean, I certainly would have assumed that. Which in turn raises the question of why they ever did go anyplace, especially to an adjoining county where they would be that exposed. They couldn't have had this discussion by phone or Skype. Finicum didn't want to stop in the first place. He knew that our safety was up with the sheriff in Grant County who had invited us to come. He knew that if we could get to that county line, we would be protected. Well, I don't know why they would think that. This is state police, right? Don't the Oregon State Police have jurisdiction in all of Oregon's counties? I'm not sure why they think they would be protected. Because we had seen all these vehicles that were trying to pull us over and knew that it was a setup and was trying to get to safety. Well, that sheriff did, but not the one in Harney County? How do they know that the sheriffs weren't in on it? I mean, why did the Harney County sheriff not want to see them? Or did the Grant County sheriff agree to this face-to-face powwow in order to lure them out into the open so the Oregon State Police and the FBI could ambush them? And again, why would Finicum take that chance given how paranoid he and the rest of the Bundy gang were about law enforcement? I don't get it. Finicum hit the gas and his late-model Dodge Ram pickup began a dangerous skid and hit a snowbank. Dumb, dumb, dumb. Not just for safety reasons, gunning his vehicle on an ice and snow-covered highway, but it made him and the occupants of his truck look guilty as hell. Wouldn't it have been safer for all involved if he had stayed at the stoplight and made no sudden or suspicious moves? Why give the federal and state cops a reason to open up on them? Did they really believe at that point that they wouldn't? Heck, that was the whole premise of their actions over the preceding month. As soon as Ryan Payne opened the window, why the hell did he open the windows? Put his hands out, empty-handed. Why do you open the windows, you moron? He reaches across, and I see the red laser, and a bullet strikes. He recoiled quickly back into the car and said, "We're getting shot!" Cops were called to Dennis Michael Lynch. You know what? If this actually happened, that's awfully piss-poor aim from pretty close to point-blank range, don't you think? And again, once Finicum had skidded into that snowbank, why would anybody in the vehicle make any move whatsoever? Wait for the officer's instructions. Think about it from the Oregon State Patrol Troopers' point of view, if not the FBI's. So far as they knew, they were confronting dangerous fugitives in a tense, highly charged situation. Their trigger fingers were bound to be itchier than normal. Don't give them a reason. At least give them a chance to violate your natural rights. Your what colloquially speaking, your constitutional rights. At least give them a chance to violate them first. Jeez. We had lasers all over us and bullets were flying. Finicum jumped out with it. Stupid. Jumped out with his hands wide open, no weapons, and is running away from the vehicle in over 3 feet of snow as fast as he can run. He wasn't that deep. It might have been up to his knee, maybe 1.5 feet or 2 feet. I don't think it was 3 feet from the video. He was yelling, "Go ahead and shoot me! Shoot me! Go ahead! Shoot me!" over and over as he's running away from the vehicle. Does this sound like a rational person to you? We're slumped down. It sounds like he wanted them to shoot him. It sounds like he wanted to be a martyr. It sounds to me like that was the whole point of this exercise. We're slumped down and we're trying not to get hit because there are bullets coming. Trust me. The side of a pickup truck is not going to stop a bullet. Dodge trucks might be ram tough. They're not bulletproof. Bullets breaking out the windows, and I have a window by me just getting hit. We're pinned down. Well, I'm trying very hard. I really am not to call BS on this. At least as to the roided up melodrama. From this description, blasted. They said blasted the truck. That's what the claim is. Blasted it with what? A rocket-propelled grenade? I mean, I can't. If this account is true to the last degree, I can't figure out how anybody survived. Either the law enforcement officers, one, were firing a whole lot of warning shots, or two, were legally blind and were his human friends, or three, it wasn't nearly as bat-bleep crazy as Miss Cox makes it sound. We do know that Finicum exited his pickup and was waving his hands around from the FBI drone video. I'm guessing it wasn't at the officer's behest, so doing so was even stupider, unless he was, as I say, trying to goad them into shooting him. Watching, which bellowing, "Shoot me!" like Daffy Duck, repeatedly does seem to suggest, which means that martyrdom was quite clearly at least one of the intents of the Bundy gang, or at least was for Finicum. At least if Miss Cox's account is to be believed. There is one other possibility, I suppose, to be fair, which is that Finicum was trying to draw the officer's fire away from his friends. fire that might well not have gotten started had Mr. Payne not rolled down his window and stuck his hands out, or had Finicum not tried to make a break for it at that stoplight. At this point, both the confrontation and the entire occupation had become such a complete clusterfuck. Don't bleep it. I said fark. That I would say the miracle is that only one person was killed, except that the Oregon State Patrol and FBI could have riddled every occupant of that pickup with bullets if they had actually wanted to do so. And they didn't. Unless they had really poor aim. Yeah, draw your own conclusions, but mine is that this was somewhat less than an execution. A tragic outcome. A murder? I can't go that far. Sorry. Which makes this last bit a real eye roller, folks. Cox said Finicum was shot and killed, even though she doesn't believe he was armed. Well, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But the FBI video does show him reaching into his jacket for something, or reaching toward it for something, which is also imbecilic when you're being confronted by multiple armed cops with their weapons drawn and pointed right at you. Unless it was a good day to die. Oh, and by the way, the Bundys set booby traps all around the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, which may or may not be improvised explosive devices. I can't wait to see the headlines if and when somebody or some buddies get blown up by one or more of them. What will be the rallying cry then? That was for Lavoie! And finally, if I can find it, here's this is John Podoret's piece, the New York Post, earlier this week. He's calling the 2016 election the Payback Election. And basically this is Trump versus Sanders. The two populists in the race. Now, if it turns out like this, I'd call it the bleep you election. Or the self-cannibalism election. Because the aftermath will be a disaster of such magnitude that I don't even want to attempt to contemplate it. Mr. Podoret's column begins, quote, "The most important takeaway, though, is this. The politics of resentment won Tuesday night. It hasn't had a showing like this in the United States maybe since the 19th century. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have a remarkably similar and remarkably simple message, and it's this. You're being screwed. They agree that international trade is screwing you, that healthcare companies are screwing you, and that the Wall Street is screwing you. And yet they would be the biggest screwers of you yet, if you put either of them into power. Look for yourself. Sanders says he's going to throw bankers in jail, raise everybody's taxes, and provide universal health care. Trump says he'll deport every illegal alien, which is impossible, keep Muslims out of the country until we can find out what the hell is going on, which would be highly advisable, but is also impossible. Force Mexico to build a wall, which is laughably impossible. Levy a 45% tariff on Red China, which would deepen the Depression and probably start the next World War. And provide universal health care, just like Barry and Bernie. Simple, straightforward, catchy. That's the key. And none of it is your fault. Oh no! Everything bad that's happening Everything that makes you nervous and worried and uncertain about the future is the result of a great wrong that is being done to you by somebody else. You know, like the capitalists or the Jews. That's what the Nazis blamed all of early 1930s Germany's problems on. Just saying, I'm not calling either of these men anti-Semites. Hell, Sanders is Jewish. So I'm not calling it. Don't. I'm just illustrating the kind of thing where one guy's a communist, the other guy's a nation fascist. That's what it amounts to. Strong man, authoritarian, strong man. Even though the truth is that we the people, did it to yourselves with your voting choice in the past 2 presidential elections, or at least 62 million of you did. Sanders says it's being done by malefactors of great wealth. Trump says it's being done by morons and idiots who run Washington and are getting their hats handed to them by canny malefactors in Beijing and Mexico City. Will this message carry beyond New Hampshire? Of course it will. Whatever happens to the candidacies of these 2 men. Don't look for uplift. Don't seek vision. This is probably going to be the payback election. Actually, the first of a long series of them, actually, since revenge is a dish that is never served just once, but over and over and over. The payback of whom? With what? To accomplish what? For what purpose? These questions matter, and it's far better to calm down, turn on our brains, and obtain answers to them now than 9 months from now, when it'll be too late. Because emotional binges are temporary. Their horrible, ill-considered consequences are forever. Hell, just look at the preceding 8 years. You know what? Call it the mass temper tantrum psychosis election. Because that sort of election always turns out so well. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're all set to go. One more thing to mention, ladies and gentlemen. Just came out today. Wrote about it, politicalpistachio.com. U.S. millennials, a generation that is actually bigger than the baby boomers, believe it or not, prefer communism over capitalism. This is America, the next generation, folks. They prefer communism over capitalism. In the Democrat Party, hey, look at Tuesday night's Democrat primary in New Hampshire. 83% of voters aged 18 to 29 chose the avowed communist Bernie Sanders, according to exit polls, and those voters were a full 1/5 of the Democrat electorate. That's the Democrats, right? Of course, they're the party of the left. They're the de facto Communist Party USA, right? But it's not just them. It's in the general electorate at large as well. This is from the Washington Post. In a recent YouGov survey, the respondents were asked whether they had a favorable or unfavorable opinion of socialism and of capitalism. As you can see, overall, 52% of the total survey, everybody that they surveyed, 52%, barely more than half, expressed a favorable view of capitalism compared to 29% for socialism. Republicans, those in families earning more than $100,000 and people aged 65 plus, had an especially high regard for capitalism compared with socialism. The respondents in almost every demographic category demonstrated the same preference to some degree, except Democrats, who rated socialism and capitalism equally positively, and respondents younger than 30 were the only group that rated socialism, communism, more favorably than capitalism by a margin of 43% to 32%. Remember when Adolf Hitler said the following? When an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," I calmly say, "Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on." Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community. You know, it took a little over a century, but the words of Nikita Khrushchev in 1957 have finally proven prophetic, other than his empire being the beneficiary of them. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you'll finally wake up and find you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you'll fall like an overripe fruit into our hands. You know, the other flaw in that quote is that we fed socialism to ourselves until we started gorging ourselves on it in 2008. There's a very sound reason for my argument that we crossed the final Rubicon in 2012. President Nixon once said that no president can destroy the country in a single term. The implication of that declaration was that we, the people, would correct our mistake at the next opportunity, rather than repeating and permanentizing it. 4 years ago, that civic immune system failed, or was so debilitated by the blanket progressification of the culture over the decades that it was finally overwhelmed. And now we're looking at a 2016 presidential campaign in which one party is choosing between an honest communist and a dishonest communist, and the other party is being front-run by a nascent fascist, and the incumbent Islamo-communist ruler may not allow an election at all. This is why I continue to warn the Tea Partiers that fight, fight, fight misses the point, and that our problem is not the Republican establishment, but rather that we need them, and as many allies as we can get. There can be no saving or preserving the Republic, because it's already been lost. This fight is one of years, decades, even generations. A long-term political insurgency. A conservative underground, as it were. There will be no quick turnarounds, my friends. To borrow and properly adjust a metaphor that my friend Douglas V. Gibbs likes to use, we went over the falls 4 years ago, at the latest. Our task now is to, number one, not drown, and number two, learn how to swim back up them, because there's no place else to go. See you tomorrow on the Saturday afternoon extravaganza, blogtalkradio.com/American Daily Review, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Have a great weekend, and we will be back live on Monday with more of the hard starboard radio network.